The mining colony of Zarion 7 had been silent for 3 days. Commander Zethkar of the Galactic Confederation Navy stared at the holographic display showing the barren world spinning slowly in the void. The last transmission from the colony had been a desperate plea for help. Raiders from the Vorthak Empire had descended upon the peaceful settlement like locusts upon grain. "Still no response from the surface, Commander," reported his communications officer, a young Talari whose crystalline features reflected the blue glow of her console. "The orbital defense platforms have been completely destroyed." Zethkar's forearms moved in a gesture of frustration that was universal among his species. The Confederation's nearest military outpost was 6 hyperspace jumps away, and by the time reinforcements arrived, there would be nothing left to save. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy for their brutality. They took what they wanted and left only ash and bones behind. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, his voice tight with barely controlled fear, "we're detecting massive Vorthak signatures approaching from the outer system. At least 30 ships, including 3 heavy cruisers." The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Zethkar's crew looked to him for orders, but what orders could he give? His single patrol vessel, the Harmony's Grace, was no match for such a force. They had weapons enough to disable a few pirates or respond to mining accidents, but facing the Vorthak war fleet would be suicide. On Zarion 7's surface, the situation was even more desperate. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the cool metal wall of the research facility's emergency shelter, listening to the distant sounds of destruction echoing through the corridors above. The human xenobiologist had been studying the unique crystal formations that made Zarion 7 valuable to the Confederation when the attack began. Around her, 47 other survivors from various species huddled in the darkness. There were Talari researchers with their translucent skin now pale with terror, stocky Brogans whose usual boisterous nature had been reduced to fearful whispers, and even a few Etherians whose normally glowing forms had dimmed to barely visible outlines. "The emergency beacon is still active," whispered Crix, a Talari engineer whose expertise with communication systems had kept their distress signal broadcasting despite the chaos above. "But who knows if anyone will receive it in time?" Elena checked her tablet, noting the dwindling power levels in their shelter. They had maybe 18 hours of life support left, and that was if the Vorthak didn't find them first. She had heard stories of what happened to prisoners taken by the raiders, stories that made death seem like mercy. "We need to consider our options," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "If we can reach the communication array in the main research building, we might be able to boost the signal strength of our distress beacon." A collective shudder ran through the group. The main building was where the Vorthak had established their command center. They could hear the alien voices barking orders in their harsh language, punctuated by the occasional scream that made everyone flinch. "That's suicide," muttered Gornex, a Brogan mining supervisor whose usual confidence had evaporated. "The Vorthak have that entire sector locked down. We wouldn't make it 10 meters before they spotted us." Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her, some human, some decidedly not, but all united in their terror and desperation. She had trained for emergency situations during her years with the Confederation Scientific Corps, but nothing had prepared her for this level of hopelessness. Above their hiding place, the Vorthak continued their systematic looting of the colony. These raiders were different from the usual pirates that plagued the Outer Rim. They were soldiers of an empire that had been expanding aggressively for the past 5 years, conquering worlds and enslaving populations with ruthless efficiency. Captain Morgoth of the Vorthak 7th Assault Fleet stood in the ruins of the colony's administrative center, his massive frame casting shadows across maps and data displays. The Vorthak were a predatory species, evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived. Their society reflected this heritage. Might made right, and weakness was to be exploited or eliminated. "Status report," he growled in his species' guttural language, his red eyes scanning the tactical display. 17 structures cleared and stripped of valuables, reported his second-in-command. "We've detected signs of survivors in the lower levels, but they've gone to ground like vermin. Shall we begin excavation protocols?" Morgoth considered this. Excavation protocols meant tearing apart the facility level by level until every hiding place was exposed. It was time-consuming but thorough. However, their scouts had detected the approach of the main fleet, and he wanted to have the colony completely pacified before they arrived. "Begin excavation, but focus on areas with the highest energy signatures. These cowards are using powered shelters. Find them and drag them out." Meanwhile, in the cold vacuum of space, something unprecedented was happening. A massive rent in the fabric of space-time opened near the edge of the system, crackling with energies that made nearby asteroids glow with induced radiation. From this impossible tear, in reality, emerged something that should not have existed. The Indomitable Will, flagship of the Terran Colonial Defense Force, slid through the rift like a knife through silk. Behind it came a fleet that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capabilities. Sleek destroyers with hull configurations that seemed to bend light around them, massive carriers disgorging swarms of fighters that moved with impossible precision, and support ships bristling with weapons that pulsed with barely contained energy. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, her dark eyes reflecting the tactical displays that showed the disposition of enemy forces throughout the system. At 53, she was a veteran of humanity's expansion beyond the Sol system, but this was her first encounter with the Vorthak Empire. "Signal from the Confederation vessel, Admiral," reported her communications officer. "They're requesting immediate assistance and advising us that we are heavily outgunned." Admiral Chen smiled grimly. The Galactic Confederation had specific ideas about how space warfare should be conducted, honorable engagements between roughly equivalent forces, with rules and protocols that went back thousands of years. Humanity had never bothered to read those rules. "Send a response to the Confederation ship. Tell them to maintain position and observe. Also, transmit our surrender demand to the Vorthak fleet." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Surrender demands were typically issued by the side with superior numbers and firepower. By all conventional calculations, the human fleet was outnumbered and outgunned by a significant margin. "Sir," the tactical officer said carefully, "the Vorthak fleet consists of 37 vessels including heavy cruisers. Our force numbers only 15 ships." "I can count, Lieutenant," Admiral Chen replied dryly. "Send the surrender demand anyway. Give them 60 seconds to respond before we begin enforcement actions." On the Harmony's Grace, Commander Zeth Carr watched the impossible scene unfolding before him with growing confusion. The human fleet had appeared from nowhere, using some form of FTL technology he had never encountered. More disturbing was their apparent confidence in the face of overwhelming odds. "Commander," his sensor operator called out, "the human ships are strange. I'm detecting energy readings that don't match any known propulsion or weapons systems. Their hull configurations are unlike anything in our databases." Zethkar studied the human vessels on his tactical display. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost organic, maintaining formations that shifted and flowed like schools of fish. There was something predatory about their movements that made his skin crawl. The Vorthak response to humanity's surrender demand was predictably hostile. Captain Morgoth transmitted a series of graphic threats describing what they would do to the human crews after their inevitable victory. It was standard Vorthak intimidation, crude but effective against most species. Admiral Chen listened to the translation with the patience of someone waiting for a child to finish a tantrum. 30 seconds remaining," she announced to her bridge crew. All ships prepare for combat operations. Authorization code Omega-77. Rules of engagement, unrestricted. Throughout the human fleet, weapon systems that had been theoretical just decades ago came online with deadly precision. Particle accelerators that could punch holes through asteroid-sized targets hummed with barely contained power. Quantum torpedo launchers adjusted their firing solutions based on real-time calculations of enemy movement patterns. Most importantly, the experimental neural interface systems that linked each ship's AI directly to its human crew began the synchronization process that would turn the fleet into something greater than the sum of its parts. Time, Admiral Chen announced. All ships, execute Operation Falling Hammer. Priority targets are the heavy cruisers. Lighter vessels are secondary objectives. What happened next would be studied in military academies throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The human ships didn't charge forward in the grand tradition of fleet engagements. They simply vanished. The advanced stealth systems that humanity had developed during their expansion phase rendered the ships effectively invisible to conventional sensors. They reappeared seconds later, but now they were scattered throughout the Vorthak formation like wolves among sheep. The first Vorthak heavy cruiser, Blood of Conquest, died before its crew even realized they were under attack. Quantum torpedoes materialized inside its hull through dimensional rifts that bypassed shields entirely. The massive vessel simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. Captain Morgoth watched in horror as his fleet began dying around him. This wasn't warfare as he understood it. This was something new and terrible. The human ships struck without warning, their weapons ignoring every defensive technology the Vorthak possessed. Shields designed to stop the heaviest conventional weapons were useless against attacks that came from inside the target vessel. "All ships, converge on coordinates 77 Alpha," he roared into his communicator. "Focus fire on the largest human vessel." But when his remaining ships attempted to target the human flagship, their sensors showed empty space. The indomitable will was directly in front of them, clearly visible to the naked eye, but their targeting systems insisted nothing was there. "Admiral," reported the tactical officer aboard the human flagship, "enemy forces are attempting to concentrate fire on our position. Their targeting systems appear to be experiencing difficulties." Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. The quantum interference field surrounding her ship was one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets. It created a localized distortion in space-time that made accurate targeting impossible while allowing her ship to fire normally. "Continue engagement pattern Alpha 3. Disable their command vessel but leave it intact. I want prisoners for intelligence gathering." The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds. When it was over, the Vorthak fleet existed only as debris fields and the few survivors aboard Morgoth's heavily damaged command ship. On Zarian 7's surface, the sudden silence from above was more terrifying than the sounds of battle had been. The Vorthak forces in the research facility had received frantic communications from their ships before the transmissions cut off entirely. "Something has happened to the fleet," Elena whispered, pressing her ear to the shelter door. "Listen, no more orders being shouted above us." Indeed, the complex had fallen strangely quiet. The survivors looked at each other with a mixture of hope and fear. Had rescue arrived, or had something even worse taken control of the system? Their answer came in the form of a new transmission on the emergency frequencies. A calm human voice speaking in perfect galactic standard. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force to all survivors on Zarian 7. The hostile forces in your system have been neutralized. Remain in secure positions while our ground forces conduct sweep and clear operations. Medical personnel are standing by for immediate assistance." The shelter erupted in a cacophony of voices as survivors from different species all began talking at once. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as the reality hit her. They were going to live. Somehow, impossibly, rescue had arrived. But even as relief flooded through her, Elena couldn't shake a nagging question that would haunt her for years to come. Just who exactly were these humans, and how had they developed technology that made the Vorthak fleet look like children playing with toys? On the bridge of the Indomitable Will, Admiral Chen studied the preliminary damage reports with satisfaction. 0 human casualties, minimal ammunition expenditure, and a complete tactical victory against a numerically superior force. More importantly, they had sent a clear message to the Vorthak Empire about what happened when they threatened human civilians. "Signal the Harmony's grace," she ordered. "Invite their commander aboard for debriefing, and prepare diplomatic channels. The Galactic Confederation is going to have questions about what they just witnessed." As her crew worked to implement her orders, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Humanity's expansion into the galaxy had been cautious and methodical, carefully avoiding the attention of larger powers while they developed their technology and established colonies. But the Vorthak Empire's aggressive expansion had threatened human settlements, and that could not be tolerated. The galaxy was about to learn that while humans preferred peace and cooperation, they were extraordinarily good at war when circumstances demanded it. The age of humanity hiding in the shadows of galactic civilization was over. Below them, the first human shuttles began their descent toward Zarion 7, carrying medical teams and Marines to begin the rescue operations. Each craft was equipped with technology that would revolutionize medicine throughout the galaxy, assuming humanity decided to share it. The survivors on Zarion 7 didn't know it yet, but they were about to become witnesses to humanity's formal introduction to galactic politics, and that introduction would change everything. The rescue shuttles descended through Zarion 7's thin atmosphere like silver angels, their hulls gleaming under the pale light of the system's distant star. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched from the broken window of the research facility as the craft touched down with impossible gentleness, their landing systems making no sound whatsoever. She had expected military transports, rough, functional vehicles designed to get soldiers from point A to point B. Instead, these shuttles looked more like works of art, their surfaces flowing seamlessly from one component to another, as if they had been grown rather than built. "Stay close together," she told the other survivors as they emerged from their shelter. "We don't know their protocols yet." The first humans to exit the shuttles moved with a confidence that was both reassuring and slightly unsettling. They wore form-fitting armor that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of view, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely audible energy. But what struck Elena most was their faces, calm, professional, but with an underlying intensity that spoke of capabilities barely held in check. The team leader, a woman whose armor bore the insignia of a medical corps, approached their group with her hands visible and empty, a universal gesture of peaceful intent. "Dr. Vasquez?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent that Elena couldn't place. "I'm Commander Sarah Okafor, Terran Medical Corps. We received your personnel manifest from the orbital station's database. Are you injured?" Elena shook her head, struck by how young the commander looked despite the authority she carried. "Minor cuts and bruises, nothing serious. But we have wounded in the lower levels, Brogan miners who were caught in the initial attack." "Already en route," Commander Okafor replied, tapping a device on her wrist that projected a three-dimensional map of the facility. "Our scanners detected 17 individuals with significant injuries. Medical teams are moving to their positions now." The speed and precision of the human response was staggering. Elena watched as teams of human medics moved through the facility with the confidence of people who had detailed intelligence about every room and corridor. Their medical equipment was unlike anything she had ever seen, devices that seemed to diagnose and treat injuries simply by being held near the patient. "How do you know the facility layout so well?" asked Crix, the Talari engineer who had maintained their distress beacon. "Our architectural plans were stored in encrypted databases." One of the human technicians, a young man with cybernetic implants visible along his temples, looked up from a device he was calibrating. We mapped the entire complex from orbit using quantum resonance scanning. Resolution down to about 2 centimeters. Your database encryption is adequate for civilian purposes. The casual dismissal of what the Confederation considered military-grade security sent a chill through Elena. Just what kind of technology did these humans possess? Her question was partially answered when the medical team working on Grex, a Brogan miner who had suffered severe burns during the initial attack, achieved something that should have been impossible. The human medic, Dr. James Shue, had placed a device that looked like a metallic mesh over the Brogan's wounds. Within minutes, new tissue was growing at a visible rate, replacing damaged flesh with healthy skin. That's impossible, stammered Dr. Yineth, a Talari physician who had been treating the wounded with conventional medical techniques. Cellular regeneration at that speed would require energy levels that would cook the patient. Dr. Shue glanced up from his work with a slight smile. Quantum cellular manipulation. We don't add energy to the system. We borrow it from parallel quantum states where the patient was never injured. Tricky to stabilize, but very effective. The casual explanation of technology that defied everything the galaxy understood about medicine left the survivors speechless. Elena found herself wondering if humanity had simply developed along different technological paths than the rest of galactic civilization, or if they represented something entirely new. Above them, in orbit, a very different conversation was taking place aboard the Indomitable Will. Commander Zeth Carr of the Galactic Confederation Navy stood in Admiral Chen's ready room, his 4 arms moving in gestures of barely controlled agitation. "Admiral Chen," he was saying, his translator rendering his musical language into clipped galactic standard. "I must protest the methods your forces employed in this engagement. The Galactic Warfare Convention clearly states that cloaking technology beyond certain parameters is prohibited in civilized space." Admiral Chen sipped her tea, a blend that incorporated herbs from 3 different human colonies, and studied the alien commander with mild interest. "Commander Zethkar, with respect, humanity is not a signatory to your Galactic Warfare Convention. We're not bound by agreements we never made." "But surely you understand the spirit of civilized warfare," Zethkar pressed. "There are rules, protocols that have maintained order in this galaxy for thousands of years. What you did to the Vorthak fleet, it wasn't warfare, it was wholesale slaughter. The Vorthak Empire has been conquering peaceful worlds for 5 years, Admiral Chen replied, her voice carrying a note of steel. They've enslaved entire populations, committed genocide against species that couldn't defend themselves, and were in the process of doing the same thing here. Tell me, Commander, what does your civilized warfare do to protect innocent civilians from that kind of brutality? Zeth Kar's primary arms moved in a gesture of frustration. The Confederation has formal procedures for dealing with aggressive powers. Economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, authorized military intervention conducted according to established rules. How long do those procedures typically take? Admiral Chen interrupted. Well, the full process usually requires several years. Admiral Chen set down her teacup with deliberate precision. Commander, the people hiding in those shelters below us had maybe 18 hours of life support left. Should I have told them to wait several years for your procedures to work their way through committee? The alien commander fell silent, his crystalline features reflecting the ambient lighting as he considered her words. Finally, he spoke more quietly. Your technology, it's beyond anything we've encountered. How long have humans been developing these capabilities? Admiral Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Humans have been at war with someone or something for our entire recorded history, Commander. When we finally achieved faster-than-light travel and discovered we weren't alone in the universe, we made a decision. we would not be victims again. But your species file in the Confederation database shows humans as primarily explorers and scientists. Our civilian populations are explorers and scientists, Admiral Chen corrected. Our military is something else entirely. We've been studying every species we've encountered, learning their capabilities, understanding their technologies, all while staying quietly in the background and being dismissed as harmless newcomers. The implications of her words hit Zethkar like a physical blow. You've been preparing for war since first contact? We've been preparing for the possibility of war, Admiral Chen clarified. There's a difference. We hope we'll never need these capabilities, but we're not naive enough to believe that hope alone will protect our people. Back on the surface, Elena was discovering just how far human technology had advanced beyond anything the galaxy had previously seen. The rescue operation was proceeding with mechanical precision, but it was the casual demonstrations of impossible capabilities that truly stunned her. She watched as a human engineer named Maria Santos created a temporary shelter for the survivors using what appeared to be a small, handheld device. The woman had pointed it at an empty area of ground, and within minutes, a fully functional building had assembled itself from materials that seemed to appear from nowhere. Molecular fabrication, Santos explained when Elena asked. We scan the local environment for raw materials, silicon, carbon, trace metals, and reorganize them at the atomic level. Give me enough time and materials, and I could build a starship from asteroid dust. But the energy requirements alone, Elena began. Fusion generators, Santos replied with a shrug. Each one about the size of a briefcase, enough to power a small city. We learned a long time ago that if you're going to explore the galaxy, you need to be completely self-sufficient. Elena was beginning to understand that humanity's approach to space exploration was fundamentally different from every other species. Where the Confederation relied on established trade routes and supply chains, humans had developed the capability to create everything they needed from whatever materials were available locally. It wasn't just impressive, it was terrifying. A species with that level of technological independence would be almost impossible to control or coerce through conventional means. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of another human, this one wearing armor that seemed more heavily armed than the medical personnel. Captain Marcus Webb of the Colonial Marines moved with the easy confidence of a professional soldier, but Elena noted that his weapons remained powered down despite the potential for remaining Vorthak forces in the area. Dr. Vasquez, he said, his voice carrying the authority of command, we've completed our sweep of the facility. We found 23 Vorthak soldiers attempting to hide in the lower mining tunnels. What happened to them? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. They're alive, Captain Webb replied, and Elena felt a surge of relief. Stunned and secured for transport to our detention facilities. Admiral Chen wants them available for intelligence gathering and eventual repatriation. The fact that the humans had captured rather than killed their enemies despite the Vorthak's reputation for brutality, spoke well of their character. But Elena couldn't help wondering what kind of stunning weapons could incapacitate the notoriously tough Vorthak soldiers without permanent harm. What will happen to them? Asked Gornex, the Brogan mining supervisor who had been injured in the initial attack. That depends on several factors, Captain Webb replied diplomatically. The Admiral is currently in discussions with Confederation authorities about proper legal procedures. The Vorthak Empire isn't exactly known for respecting prisoner exchanges, but we believe in setting good examples. As the rescue operation continued, Elena found herself in conversation with Dr. Shu, the human medic whose casual manipulation of quantum mechanics had saved Grex's life. She discovered that humanity's medical advances were just one aspect of a technological revolution that had been ongoing for decades. It started with the colonization ships, Dr. Shu explained as he packed up his medical equipment. When you're traveling between stars with thousands of people in suspended animation, you need backup plans for your backup plans. We developed self-repairing systems, artificial intelligence that could handle any crisis, and medical technology that could deal with absolutely any emergency. But quantum cellular manipulation, Elena pressed, that requires an understanding of physics that goes beyond anything in our scientific literature. Dr. Shu smiled ruefully. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When your survival depends on solving impossible problems, you find ways to make the impossible merely difficult. Elena was beginning to realize that humanity's technological advancement wasn't the result of natural genius. It was the product of desperation transformed into determination. A species that had clawed its way to the stars through sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations. In the communication center of the research facility, Commander Okafor was establishing contact with Confederation authorities and coordinating the rescue operation. Elena watched as the human woman managed simultaneous conversations with orbital control, medical facilities on 3 different worlds, and what appeared to be some kind of diplomatic corps. Priority evacuation for critical medical cases to Confederation General Hospital, Okafor was saying into one channel while simultaneously coordinating supply drops with another. Standard medical cases can be treated at our mobile facilities. We have full surgical capability. The ease with which the humans were managing a complex multi-species rescue operation was almost as impressive as their military capabilities. They seemed to have contingency plans for every possible scenario and the training to implement those plans flawlessly. As the day wore on, Elena found herself in increasingly philosophical conversations with various members of the human rescue team. She learned that their technological advancement was driven by a cultural imperative that most galactic species would find incomprehensible, the absolute refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the early days of human space exploration, said Lieutenant Torres, a young woman whose job seemed to involve coordinating logistics with impossible efficiency. He said the first thing humans learned when they reached the stars was that the universe didn't care whether they lived or died, so they decided to become the kind of species the universe would have to care about. Elena pondered this as she watched human personnel work alongside Confederation survivors with seamless cooperation. There was something deeply impressive about a species that responded to cosmic indifference by becoming cosmic forces themselves. But even as she admired their capabilities, Elena couldn't shake a growing unease about what humanity's emergence as a galactic power might mean for the existing order. The Confederation had maintained relative peace for thousands of years through careful diplomacy and regulated conflict. What would happen when a species that solved problems by redefining the fundamental rules entered galactic politics? Her questions would be answered sooner than she thought. Even as the rescue operation continued on Xerion 7, the first diplomatic channels between humanity and the Galactic Confederation were opening. And those conversations would determine whether humanity's incredible capabilities would be used to protect galactic civilization or replace it entirely. 3 weeks after the rescue at Xerion 7, the Galactic Confederation's High Council convened an emergency session aboard the massive space station that served as their capital. Representatives from 47 different species filled the Great Chamber, their diverse forms creating a symphony of colors, sounds, and bioenergies that had symbolized galactic unity for millennia. Today, that unity was under severe strain. Chancellor Vexatai, the elderly Etherian who had guided the Confederation through decades of careful diplomatic progress, floated at the center of the chamber, her normally brilliant luminescence dimmed with worry. Before her stood Ambassador Sarah Nakamura, humanity's first official representative to galactic civilization. Honorable representatives, Chancellor Vextai began, her mental voice resonating through the translation matrix that allowed all species to communicate. We are gathered to address the unprecedented events at Zarion 7 and to determine humanity's place in galactic affairs. Ambassador Nakamura stood quietly as murmurs filled the chamber. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5 feet tall, with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She looked more like someone's grandmother than the representative of a species that had just redefined the nature of space warfare. "The rescue operation itself was admirable," continued the Chancellor. "However, the methods employed raise serious questions about the future of regulated conflict in our galaxy. Ambassador Nakamura, can you help us understand your species' intentions?" Ambassador Nakamura stepped forward, her movements graceful despite her age. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had spent decades in diplomatic service. "Honorable Chancellor, esteemed representatives, humanity comes before you not as conquerors or as challengers to the established order, but as a species that has learned some hard truths about survival in an indifferent universe." She gestured to a holographic display that materialized in the center of the chamber, showing humanity's expansion into the galaxy over the past century. "When humans first achieved faster-than-light travel, we were a fractured species fresh from devastating global conflicts. We had learned that peace was precious precisely because it was fragile, and that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance." The display shifted to show human colonies scattered throughout the Outer Rim territories, small, self-sufficient settlements that had avoided the attention of the major galactic powers. "We spent our first decades among the stars learning about your civilizations, studying your histories, understanding your cultures. What we discovered was both inspiring and troubling." Representative Gorthmak, a massive Brogan whose species valued directness above diplomacy, leaned forward in his specially reinforced chair. "Explain this troubling observation, human." Ambassador Nakamura's expression grew somber. "Honorable representative, in your histories we found cycles of conquest and subjugation that span millions of years. Empires rise, expand through force, and eventually collapse under their own weight. The Confederation represents the longest period of relative peace in galactic history, and yet even now, aggressive powers like the Vorthak Empire threaten that peace." "These cycles are the nature of galactic civilization," interjected Representative Yith-Ara, a Talari whose crystalline features reflected her species' logical approach to problem-solving. "The Confederation exists to manage these conflicts, to ensure they remain limited and controllable." "With respect, Representative Yith-Ara," Ambassador Nakamura replied, "your management system requires that someone be willing to sacrifice innocent lives for the sake of diplomatic process. The people of Zarion 7 would have died while your committees debated proper procedures." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices as representatives from dozens of species began arguing simultaneously. Chancellor Vexiti's luminescence flared brightly, calling for order. "The human ambassador raises valid points," the Chancellor admitted when quiet was restored. "However, your military capabilities present a different kind of threat to galactic stability. Your technology appears to be centuries ahead of current galactic standards. How can we be certain that humanity won't use these advantages for conquest?" Ambassador Nakamura smiled sadly. "Chancellor, that question reveals the fundamental difference between human civilization and every other culture we've encountered. You're asking what we plan to do with our power. That's the wrong question." "What is the right question?" asked Representative Zethkar, the same Confederation naval officer who had witnessed the destruction of the Vorthak fleet. "The right question is, what are we prepared to do to prevent the need to use our power?" The ambassador gestured again, and the holographic display changed to show detailed technical specifications that made several representatives gasp in amazement. "Humanity offers the Galactic Confederation a comprehensive technology-sharing agreement, medical advances that can extend lifespans and eliminate genetic diseases, manufacturing techniques that can end scarcity and poverty. energy systems that make interstellar travel as simple as crossing a room. All of this, freely given, with only one condition. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Representative Gorthmak was the first to speak, his deep voice echoing through the space. What condition? That the Confederation commit to protecting all sentient life, regardless of species or political affiliation. No more acceptable losses, no more diplomatic delays while innocent people die, no more tolerance for aggressive empires that treat conquest as a right. Representative Yithara's crystalline form shimmered as she processed this proposal. You're asking us to fundamentally restructure galactic civilization based on human moral imperatives. No, Ambassador Nakamura replied firmly. I'm asking you to live up to your own moral imperatives. The Confederation Charter states that all sentient life has inherent value and dignity. We're simply offering you the tools to make that principle more than empty words. Meanwhile, on Zarion 7, Dr. Elena Vasquez was witnessing the practical application of humanity's technological gifts. The research facility had been completely rebuilt using human molecular fabrication technology, but more importantly, the planet itself was being transformed. The human terraforming teams had arrived a week ago and begun implementing environmental modifications that would make Zarion 7 fully habitable for all Confederation species. Elena watched from the observation deck of the new research center as massive atmospheric processors reshaped the very air she breathed. It's like watching God's work, said Crix, the Talari engineer who had maintained their distress beacon during the crisis. They're changing the fundamental nature of an entire world in a matter of weeks. Dr. James Shu, the human medic who had saved Grex's life, joined them at the observation window. Not gods, he said with characteristic human modesty. Just people who refuse to accept that problems can't be solved. But the energy requirements alone, Elena protested, gesturing at the massive installations that were transforming Zarion 7's atmosphere. You're talking about planetary-scale engineering that should take decades with unlimited resources. That's the beauty of quantum energy manipulation, Dr. Shu explained. We're not creating energy. We're borrowing it from parallel quantum states where this work was already completed. From the universe's perspective, we're just synchronizing reality with a more desirable probability. Elena shook her head in amazement, even after weeks of exposure to human technology. She still struggled to understand how they made the impossible seem routine. What I don't understand, she said, is why you're sharing this knowledge so freely. Technology like this could make humanity the dominant force in the galaxy within a generation. Dr. Shu was quiet for a moment, watching the atmospheric processors work. Dr. Vasquez, can I ask you a question? What's the most dangerous predator on Earth? Elena considered this. I suppose it would be humans themselves. Exactly. And do you know what makes humans so dangerous? Intelligence, tool use, adaptability, cooperation, Dr. Shu replied. Humans became the dominant species on Earth because we learned to work together on unprecedented scales. We built civilizations, shared knowledge, and created technologies that no individual could have developed alone. He gestured at the terraforming operation below them. This isn't the work of human supremacy, Dr. Vasquez. This is the application of our fundamental survival strategy. Make everyone around us more capable because capable allies are more valuable than conquered subjects. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the orbital station. Admiral Chen's voice filled the observation deck with calm authority. All personnel, be advised that we have multiple Vorthak Empire fleets approaching the system. ETA approximately 4 hours. This appears to be a retaliatory force significantly larger than the previous raiding fleet. Elena felt her heart sink. After everything they had been through, after all the hope that humanity's intervention had brought, they were facing another attack. How many ships? Crix asked, her crystalline features reflecting her fear. Long-range sensors detect approximately 300 vessels across multiple fleet groups, Admiral Chen continued. This appears to be a full-scale invasion force intended to make an example of this system. The magnitude of the approaching threat was staggering. 300 ships represented roughly 10% of the Vorthak Empire's entire military capability. They weren't coming to raid, they were coming to obliterate every trace of life in the system. Dr. Shu's expression remained remarkably calm as he activated his personal communicator. Admiral, this is Medical Team Alpha. Request permission to accelerate terraforming operations to emergency completion. Permission granted, Doctor. All civilian personnel should prepare for immediate evacuation to hardened shelters. This engagement may require unrestricted defensive protocols. Elena felt a chill at the Admiral's words. If the previous battle had been conducted under restricted protocols, what would an unrestricted engagement look like? Her answer came 2 hours later when the human defensive fleet took position around Zarion 7. Elena watched from the reinforced observation bunker as ships that defied every principle of physics she understood arranged themselves in formations that seemed more like works of art than military deployments. Elena, Dr. Shu said quietly, you're about to see something that no non-human has ever witnessed. Admiral Chen has authorized the use of our strategic deterrent systems. What does that mean? Before Dr. Shu could answer, space itself began to change around them. The stars visible through the bunker's viewing ports suddenly became brighter, then dimmer, as if reality was fluctuating like water. Admiral Chen's voice reached them through the communication system, calm and professional despite the cosmic forces she was unleashing. Approaching Vorthak forces, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. You are entering protected space without authorization. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your aggression. The Vorthak response came in the form of weapons fire, energy blasts that could have destroyed continents streaking across the void toward human positions. But something impossible happened to those weapons. They simply stopped existing, as if the universe itself had decided that such violence was unacceptable. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Shu said softly, what you're seeing is humanity's final argument against military aggression. We call it quantum warfare, the ability to manipulate probability itself to ensure that peaceful outcomes become inevitable. Elena watched in stunned silence as the massive Vorthak fleet began to experience systematic failures that defied all logic. Weapon systems shut down spontaneously. Navigation computers developed errors that forced ships out of attack formations. Life support systems remained perfectly functional, but every military capability simply ceased to work. We're not destroying them, Dr. Shu explained. We're making it impossible for them to destroy us. Every time they try to use violence, the quantum probability matrix makes their weapons malfunction instead. The Vorthak fleet, faced with the complete failure of their military systems, found themselves in an impossible situation. They couldn't attack. They couldn't withdraw through hyperspace due to navigation failures, and they couldn't even communicate with their home empire due to communication system malfunctions. Admiral Chen's voice once again filled the communication channels, but this time she was addressing the entire galaxy. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Defense Force, broadcasting on all frequencies. What you have just witnessed is humanity's response to those who would use violence against innocent people. The Vorthak Empire has lost the ability to wage aggressive war, not through destruction, but through the application of quantum probability manipulation that makes violence fundamentally impossible for them. The implications of her words spread through the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Every species capable of interstellar communication received the message, along with detailed sensor readings of what had just occurred. Elena found herself crying, though she wasn't sure whether from relief, fear, or simple, overwhelming awe. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Vorthak Empire. They had removed their ability to harm anyone ever again. What happens now? she asked Dr. Shu. Now, he replied, the galaxy learns that there's a new definition of what it means to be the strongest. True strength isn't the ability to destroy your enemies, it's the ability to make enemies impossible. On the bridge of the indomitable will, Admiral Chen stood before a communication array that connected her to every major government in the galaxy. Her next words would shape the future of galactic civilization. People of the galaxy, she began, humanity offers you a choice. We can share our technology, our knowledge, and our protection with any species that commits to the principles of peaceful coexistence. Or we can continue to apply quantum probability manipulation to ensure that aggressive military actions become impossible throughout the galaxy. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. We don't seek to rule you. We seek to make ruling anyone unnecessary. The age of conquest is over, not because we've conquered everyone, but because we've made conquest itself impossible. In the Galactic Confederation's emergency session, Ambassador Nakamura stood before representatives who were still trying to process what they had witnessed. Honorable representatives, she said quietly, you asked what humanity planned to do with our power. Now you know. We plan to end the cycle of violence that has plagued this galaxy for millions of years. Chancellor Vexiti's luminescence had returned to its normal brilliance, and her mental voice carried a note of wonder. Ambassador, your species has just fundamentally altered the nature of existence itself. How can we be certain that this power won't corrupt you, as it has every other dominant species in history? Ambassador Nakamura smiled with genuine warmth. Chancellor, we've already been corrupted by power. We were corrupted by the power of seeing innocent people suffer while we had the ability to help them. That corruption taught us that true strength comes from protecting others, not from protecting yourself. As the session continued and the galaxy began to adapt to its new reality, Elena Vasquez stood on the surface of Zerion 7, breathing air that had been impossible just hours before on a world that was becoming a paradise through human intervention. The rescue that had begun with a desperate distress call had become something far greater, the rescue of an entire galaxy from its own violent history. And it had happened because one species had learned that the greatest victory was not conquering your enemies, but making it impossible for anyone to have enemies at all. Above them, the stars themselves seemed brighter, as if the universe itself approved of this new chapter in galactic history. The age of endless war was over. The age of endless possibility had begun, and it had all started with a simple human belief that no one should ever have to face hopelessness alone.